So, growing up as a black kid in the 60s
Right.
in Chicago, what type of racism did you personally experience during that time?
So much was inferred, and we were insulated. We were insulated to the point where when we would go play baseball for Little League and we had to cross Halsted Street, if anyone's familiar with Halsted, it runs the length of the city and some of the suburbs. And Chicago Heights is the beginning of Halsted Street that runs all the way north through the city. So Halsted Street was a demarcation line of white and black. So we were told when we were younger, make sure you're back on the other side of Halsted before it gets dark. Not really realizing what it meant until a couple of times when we would be walking through the Forest Preserve and white guys a little older than us would chase us back across Halsted Street. So, it was one of those things growing up. It was inferred and you would go, my mom would take us to downtown Chicago Heights and we couldn't sit at the lunch counter. We would see little kids sitting there eating their ice cream and chilling and while their mom is shopping and I had to be at my mom's hip because it was just that period of time. And those types of things, when I stop and look at it, that you were actually growing up under Jim Crow, you know what I'm saying? And that to see where we are now, I'm 59 years old, and to know that those battles and many of them, so when I look at this whole pandemic thing and they say the underlying causes, but we don't want to get to the underlying causes of the systemic white supremacy racism that's at the root of all our issues.
Well, you mentioned your mother and your grandfather. Where was your father around during this time?
My pops was the mayor of Fort Heights, which is the next suburb from Chicago Heights. And for me, watching him, and it was somewhat from afar because he wasn't in our household. I was in the household with my granddad and my uncles. That was my primary male role models. But I didn't have a dysfunctional relationship with my father. It was a one of honor, one of honor and respect because he held a position within the community that was important and necessary. And that, not that he was held on any pedestal, but it was an understanding and respect level throughout the community of what he was doing in the city of East Chicago Heights at that time. And it was just, and that's the thing that is hard to galvanize and to feel if you weren't a part of it. The only thing I can liken it to is during that period of time when Barack was just getting his feet wet and starting to get his support, that you could start to feel a palpable pulse in the community that was starting to vibrate similar to what it was during the 60s. But it still wasn't comparable because it was watered down because it did have the political thread of the white supremacy racism that's throughout the governmental policies and seats, wherever you may sit, you still had that foundation under you.
Well, you mentioned playing baseball early
Yes,
on.
yes.
At what point did you start playing basketball?
I played basketball all the time, but baseball was my love, man. Baseball was the thing that my granddad told me when I was 6 years old that the quickest way to the big show or to be a professional was to be a catcher. So on my sixth birthday, he gave me all of the catcher's gear, and I caught from the time I was 6 until I was probably 15 years old, man. And it was just boring to me because the game was so slow and Chicago was so hot in the summers. So to have on all that gear, man, it was one of those things where I was good at it. I loved the game, but the game of basketball was something that was interactive. It was more exciting. It was play to play to play to play. That it was a transitional thing about it that I liked. And tennis was also something that was early in my life that I did a lot of. And we were blessed that during that period of time to have had access through programs that the park ran. And my granddad was the park manager at a couple of parks. And it was one of those things where my uncles taught me the proper way to play sports, but my aunts always, and my sister told me that I was never going to get to play any sports if my books weren't tight. So there was a student athletic component within the household that lent itself to me being able to get recruited to go play basketball.
Okay. Like at what point, like what age did you know, okay, like I'm really better than everyone else
17,
around me?
not, and the thing about it was never, and I think those are the great things is that when you have a support base of different things. So I had a support base in the athletics and the students, but I also had a support base that was a challenging base. I had a Raymond McCoy, who was the #1 point guard in America. He and Isaiah were neck and neck. So me and Raymond grew up together, and Raymond was always the golden one, the one that was going to be the pro. So I had to grow up in that shadow, and in that shadow was where I needed to be because I was a skinny, scary cat that I was a wallflower. I didn't want nobody to see my progress. And probably when we moved from Chicago Heights to Park Forest, and I had to go and now compete against where I grew up, it became a thing of both confidence and becoming more courageous in how I played the game. And to be able to have the challenge of being as good as Raymond, being able to be recruited. For me, it was between my sophomore and junior year. I averaged about 25 points a game on the sophomore team. I played 2 games of varsity, and that's another story. After that summer, my uncle told me that all he wanted me to catch and shoot the ball. I was doing a lot off the dribble, and that's where I honed in my shooting skills a lot more. Not that I couldn't shoot the ball when I was in 6th grade, but everything, I was a guard. So I worked on my ball handling and my shooting, but I became more concentrated in my focus on shooting between my sophomore and junior year. And it paid dividends, man. To this day, that was the year that set my shooting to a point where it became understandable in my own psyche of how to make the ball go in the basket almost every time if I didn't get fouled. And if it didn't go in, I knew those reasons why. And that's the part for me that year. And I had great coaching, man. Steve Fisher was my high school coach who coached the Fab Five and coached San Diego State to, coach Kawhi Leonard. So I've had great coaching, man. And through that coaching, you've been able to have your own creativeness and to be able to see why you do certain things and where you can lend that to the big part of making you where your game is whole and complete.